Rubber wood is a diffuse porous light hardwood species belonging to the family Euphorbiaceae. It is highly susceptible to the attack of fungi and insects immediately after felling. The main reason for this biological deterioration is the presence of high quantity of soluble sugar and starch in the storage tissues. Hence, immediately after felling, the timber should be subjected to preservative treatment and seasoning.
Welcome to this session. Today, we will be looking at library finance and budgeting. Libraries are non-profit service organizations, so they are considered as spending institutions. Once a library has been established, sufficient funds are required to function libraries smoothly. As per the fifth law of library science, libraries are growing institutions and more funds are needed for the developments. In short, finance is essential for running a library. The amount of funds made available towards the library resources and personnel would reflect to a large extent the quality of the library resources and services. Source of finance. Depending upon the type of library, the sources of finance may vary. Some sources are common, while the others are applicable to special type of libraries. The main sources of income for a public library are membership subscription, library fee, government grants, endowment and gifts, fees and fines, sale of old newspapers and journals, miscellaneous income. Sources of income for academic libraries are budget allocation, endowments and gifts, grants from central and state government, UGC grants, funds from Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan, fees and fines, sale of old publications, charges from reprography and documentation, miscellaneous income. Sources of income for special libraries are budget allocation from parent body, government grants, funds allotted for projects, funds from international agencies, sale of old publications, fee from information products and services, miscellaneous income. Library expenses. The following are the normal expenses of libraries: salary, building and furniture, lighting, books and other reading resources, periodicals and journals, e-resources and databases, computer, internet and such other items, rent and insurance, transport and postage, stationery items, miscellaneous. Financial estimation. Success of any institution depends upon an adequate and regular flow of finances. Some important bases for financial estimation for libraries are user population and its composition, material to be acquired, media, nature and type of information source, services to be provided, hardware and software requirement, established national and international standards for quality in services, increase in prices of reading materials and inflation. Methods of financial estimation. The following are the three methods of finding out the amount of finance required for providing satisfactory library services. Per capita method. In per capita method, a minimum amount per head of population is fixed, keeping in view the requirement for standard library services. The per capita estimate can be based either on the number of literate persons or adults. There are two opinions in this regard. One is that it can be estimated only for literate people because only they use the library. The other opinion is that it has to consider each member of the population. Proportional method. In this method, a fixed proportion of the total budget of an organization is to be considered as the amount required for running library. In India, various standards have been suggested for public library finance. Dr. S.R. Ranganathan suggested that either 10% of the total budget or 6% of the educational budget of government. The working group on libraries suggested that the provision for public libraries should be such that the annual expenditure thereon is no case less than 1.5% of the total annual expenditure on education. According to Kothari Commission, 6.5% of educational budget as a reasonable expenditure on libraries. Method of details. According to this method of financial estimation, all items of expenditure are accounted while preparing finance of library. This will include salaries, wages, books, periodicals, e-resources, binding, telephone, stationery, etc. Library budget. A budget is an estimation of probable income and expenditure of an institution or an organization for next year. So library budget is estimated income and expenditure of a library for the next year. Generally, budget is prepared for 1 year. Sometimes it may be prepared for 2 years and 5 years. The possible means of income of library are subscription from the members, endowments, library cess, interest on deposit, government grants, fines and fee from various services. The possible expenditure of libraries are salary of staff, building cost or rent, reading resources such as books, periodicals, etc., building, transport, postage, equipments and machinery, stationery, lighting and miscellaneous expenses. Importance of library budget. Library budget has the following importance. it is the reflection of financial situation, that is, income and expenditure of a library. It serves as a plan for efficient and effective coordination of resources and expenditure during a particular period of time. It gives details regarding the services that are planned to start in the future. It serves as a basic financial control mechanism. It serves as a management tool. It reflects the goals and objectives of the library. Factors to be considered in budget making: type of library, academic, public or special, size of the organization, whether the library budget is independent or part of the general budget of parent organization, type of the users of library, type of collection, services given by the library. Budgeting techniques or methods. There are mainly 7 methods of budget making. They are lump sum budget, line budgeting, formula budgeting, program budgeting, performance budgeting, planning programming budgeting system, zero-based budgeting. Let us have a brief description of each one. Lump sum budget. This is the unscientific and ancient method of allocation. According to this method, librarian is allotted a sum of rupees, just like our grandmothers were allotted money for housekeeping. This is not scientific method, so this method is not advisable to be practiced in libraries. Line budgeting. Line or line item budgeting is the most common budgeting method in libraries. Each category of expenditure is represented by line. These lines or categories can be books, periodicals, e-books, e-journals, etc. Each line named can vary widely from budget to budget, from institution to institution. In many organizations, each budget line will have an identifying number that helps to standardize budgets from department to department within the institution. The budget is prepared with a small increase of 5 to 10% on the previous year's budget. Line by line budgeting is also known as incremental budgeting because it is simply extrapolating next year's budget from what happens this year. Line budget is easy to prepare and understand. There are, of course, some problems for this kind of budgeting. That is, the one prepared line will be always as line even though there is any mistake. It will be continued. The other disadvantage is shifting expenditure from one head to another head even though it is going to lapse. Formula budgeting. In formula budgeting, money is allocated according to formula, usually involving number or kinds of people. In libraries, formula budgets usually apply to how and which library materials are purchased and when. Some academic libraries are using this type of budgeting, that is, allocating a fixed rupee, for example, rupees 100 per student enrolled in the institute. Program budgeting. This method is relatively new method of budgeting. According to this method, the expenditure is not divided on the basis of individual items of expenditure, but on the basis of library activities and services. The focus in this method of budgeting is on the library activities, and funds are to be earmarked for programs of services being provided and plan to be executed. Here the programs of a library are listed and grouped, which may correspond to the organizational structure of the library, like administrative service, technical service, reader service, etc. Each of these departments may be organized through departments such as acquisition, classification, cataloging, reference, bibliographic service, documentation and information services, together with the summary description of these programs and comparative figures of current and proposed expenditure. This method gives an opportunity to the heads of various departments to determine their requirement and watch the expenditure. A problem with the program budgeting in many libraries is that carrying out program budgeting can be difficult for the librarian and staff who have never thought of program lines. Performance budgeting. This method is somewhat similar to the program budgeting method, but the difference is that here the emphasis is given to the performance and not to the program. This method requires careful communication of quantitative data on activities over a period of time. Management techniques such as cost-benefit analysis are used to measure the performance in established norms. For example, information about the number of books acquired, classified and catalogued, actual man-hours for doing the entire work, etc. are collected to determine manpower and materials to perform the task. This method measures only quantity and not quality, which is rather difficult to measure in terms of money cost. So, the budget allocation for a service organization like library will be difficult. Planning Programming Budgeting System, PPBS. This method of budgeting was first proposed by U.S. Department of Defense in 1961. Two key elements of PPBS are budgeting and system analysis. As an extension of program budgeting, PPBS involves system analysis and or other cost-effectiveness processes to provide a more systematic and comprehensive comparison of costs and benefits of alternative approaches to a policy goal or program objective. The important steps in PPBS are identifying the objectives of library, presenting the alternative ways to achieve those objectives, identifying the activities that are necessary to each program, evaluating the result so that corrective actions can be taken. This method combines the best of both program budgeting and performance budgeting. The focus in this method is on planning. It begins with the establishment of goals and objectives and ends with the formulation of programs or services. The controlling aspect of measurement, which is central to performance budgeting, is also an aspect of PPBS. This method combines the functions of planning activities, programs and services, translating them into tangible projects, and finally presents the requirements in budgetary terms. Zero-based budgeting, ZBB. Zero-based budgeting was developed by Peter Fire during the early 1970s. This method requires a thorough knowledge of the organization and a lot of time, effort and training. Unlike the other methods of budgeting, zero-based budgeting emphasizes current activities and the necessity to justify each part of the program every year. It assumes a budget of 0 for each program until one convinces the appropriating authority that the program is worthwhile and deserving of support at a specified level. It does not allow for incremental growth in budget. ZBB is an operating planning and budgeting process which requires each manager to justify his entire budget request in detail. This approach requires that all activities be identified and developed as decision packages and that there should be a systematic evaluation and ranking of these decision packages, preferably